Hey, welcome to Lab, the podcast. I am honored today to be with a friend and also an author and speaker and Christian apologist, Kara Kennedy. Kara lives in Tampa with her husband and daughters and serves on the board of directors for Apologetics, Inc., also the president of ClearTrust, a shareholder services company. She completed a business program of Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics in 2014 and holds a master's from Harvard University with a concentration in world religion. Her first book, Supper, which I have right here and is beautiful, Reflections from Our Table. It's a collection of essays that seek to recover the enchanting presence of Christ in the everyday experience of a family table, which I love. So, Kara, so good to be spending time with you. I love this.
Thank you so much, Zach. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's Oxford, enchantment, Jesus, all these things. I was like, okay, we could have a 4-hour podcast.
All good things.
Yeah, like let's just sit down. And I was trying to decide, do I want to have a 400-hour podcast or just like somehow convince you to join V3's team because you embody the life and beauty of the gospel. We were talking before we started recording that's really the whole point of this show is to find people whose lives and work give us a glimpse of the life and beauty of the gospel. And your book certainly does that. So we'll go into that. It's like slicing into that. But you do that. And Juan, your husband, and everything. So it's so good to get time with you. How did that, give me a glimpse of, I'm always curious, like where that, the origin story for some of that life and beauty of the gospel, where that came from. So take us back to like, let's say 12 years old. Where would we find you? What is 12-year-old Kara like? And where were you at?
Well, I was living here in Tampa.
Okay.
12-year-old Kara would have been pretty nerdy, all about the books and all about learning and figuring things out. I would have been very homesick, though. So I was born in Arkansas. My entire family to this day still lives in Arkansas. My dad's job brought my sisters and my parents us to Florida when I was 8. And we were actually only going to be here a few years and then go back. And to this day, my grandmother still asks, like, when are y'all going to move back home? So it was always home. I always felt a little bit displaced here. And yeah, we would be going back and forth from Arkansas to Florida quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that was, that was me back then.
Bookish, 12-year-old, homesick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you think you were going back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like we always planned on going back. My parents too, all of us knew because we just felt like we belonged there. Like that was home. That's where our family is. That's where all our feasting happens and all the joy and the laughter was there. And it's interesting because now that I'm old enough that I actually could go back, I don't. And what I've realized is the longing that was stirred in me that my family in Arkansas gave me was actually this longing for my real home. And that was just a signpost. That was just pointing me there. And so I'm so grateful to Arkansas and I'm so grateful to my family because they gave me a longing for heaven that I don't think I otherwise could have had.
Yeah. Yeah, you're speaking our language. We have another podcast, the Wayfarer podcast, and the entire idea is trying to recover that sense of there's a restlessness for place and a longing for a better country that we don't know how to make sense of that. And the rootedness part, I lived that when we came to Florida. Well, first we told people likely 2 years, right? Like we don't know what God is doing, but we're going to go for a couple of years. I'm going to write. And then we'll see. And I think in all of our minds, there was we're going to go back.
Yeah.
This will be a very temporary thing. We'll grow, we'll change, and we'll go back.
Mm-hmm.
And as that started to unfold in a different way, it was hard because, like you said, that's your place and your roots are in that dirt. And a friend of mine said to be extruded from that context, there's a very disruptive thing that happens to you and you long for that, but you're not really longing for that if you really go to the depth of it. But you need long enough to realize that.
Yes, this is right.
Yeah. So you knew you were a book person. Would 12-year-old Kara be surprised that you went to Harvard?
A little bit. 12-year-old Kara would have been very surprised that I could have been accepted to Harvard, yes, and graduated. But I say a little bit because there was this vision and this dream that my dad gave me way before I turned 12 that I was meant to go there. And this was this highest ideal. And all of my work in school and all of those books I read, everything really should have been pointing in this direction of leading me along a path to get there. I definitely didn't take the path my dad projected for me or thought I might take to get there. I eventually made it, but yeah, it's definitely a surprise.
Yeah. Was your dad a professor? Was he academia his world, or why was his aim for you? Like, was that just like, hey, the highest bar of education you can hit, that's what I want for you?
My dad is not a professor. He's a dreamer.
Okay.
My dad is a visionary, and he saw something in me. My parents both saw something in me when I was young, and his brother is a professor with 2 PhDs. He's very much been a mentor to me, my Uncle Rob, and somehow collectively together, they all kind of determined like this is the path for Kara.
Yeah. But you're going to stop off at Oxford first and do some of that and then end up.
Yeah, very indirect route. It was circuitous.
Yeah, well, you probably see differently. We all see differently now, right? But 12-year-old wouldn't have imagined it maybe kind of wondered about it. But then at some point, you set out on a course that would include that. And you went to world religions. What was it that made you say, now that I am going to go and I'm accepted and that's what I'm going to do, I'm going to focus on world religion. Mm-hmm. What made you want to focus in and circle on that? I mean, you're a business owner, you're all sorts of different things and parts of you. Why was that the part of you that you wanted to explore at Harvard?
Yeah, so I think that original Harvard path very much would have been a career path of, you need to get this prestigious degree to get this prestigious job. And for me, in this very meandering road I took, I actually, by the time I got to Harvard, I already had a career. I already had some measure of success. I was already established. And I knew that no degree was going to allow me to advance further in the field that I'm in. So because I already had that, it's like, look, if I'm going to study something that I want to study. And that means I want to study something that I think matters. And I think that the way that people see the world matters. The way they contemplate eternity matters greatly. And I wanted to understand better how people different from me saw God and themselves and the universe. And if I could listen to their stories, listen to who they are and where they're coming from, then it might help me to find these connection points where I might be able to introduce them to Jesus, where I might be able to say that deep longing that you have, that big question that your religious quest is trying to fill, that is only truly satisfied in Jesus. But how can I have those conversations and do that if I don't first listen and understand where they're coming from? And plus, I mean, world religion is just interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more interesting. That's what's interesting to us, is that we're moving from secular to post-secular. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, like, well, religion's a fantasy, it's an opiate for the masses. Like it's something to be discarded and overcome. And that enlightenment push to say, like, can we cut loose of the myth and the fairy tale and the gods? Like, God is dead, let's get done with that. I think that was, well, it's obviously not true. It's not reality. And so you can only suppress that or cover that for so long. And I think where the moment we're in 2023 is there's a lot of longing. I mean, everybody, the term is open transcendent, but the landscape is much more open transcendent, and people on a religious quest saying, I'm searching for something. I'm longing for home. And I don't know how to describe it or how to think about it, but here's where my family of origin has thought about it, or my tradition or tribe has thought about it. So I love that the fact that you gave your time and resource to study in that way in order to prepare. I think it's wonderful too, because there is a degree of excellence there that people do respect and say, it's not just that you read on your own or studied on your own or had conversations on your own, but you really did give time and attention specifically to that conversation with people who are at the highest level trying to think about those things. Did it feel like that? Like, I mean, that's my imagination of the environment and the setting that you were in. Having participated, did you leave going, I'm satisfied?
Yeah. I mean, I tell you what, it was very challenging to me. I took the coursework very seriously. I read every book. I read all the essays. This 12-year-old nerd Kara like definitely came out,
Like
but
a dream life, man.
There was a very high expectation of excellence. I couldn't get by anything. I couldn't in my writing and my essays or my articulations of Christianity or what I was trying to say. They would not allow me to skip any step. Because say, oh, but what about this? Oh, but Karl Marx says that, and oh, but postmodernism this, and oh, you're just projecting your feeling, and so like it was very demanding. And so if I was going to give a faithful witness to Christ, and if I was going to get an A in my class, I would really have to be well read, well thought, well documented. I would really have to wrestle and be precise in the scholarly language that I was using. And I would have to engage head on with academics, writers, thinkers, other religious leaders who thought very, very differently from me. So that kind of wrestling, while it was involving many, many tears and it was very challenging, it was so satisfying in the end, because at the end of the journeys, at the end of these writings, I was able to, by God's grace, I was able to produce something that I was proud of, that I felt was a faithful witness to Christ. And I don't know, somehow I was able to, I had earned it. It wasn't given to me. It was earned. I was somehow able to sneak past watchful dragons, so to speak, and to get that, that degree. And I thought, you know what, having done all this wrestling and all this writing and all this thinking, in the end, what I see is that all of those very loud voices at Harvard, and they are very loud and they protest very much, and you see that in the news right now. All of those voices at Harvard that fancy themselves so enlightened and so open and so right in so many ways, actually they have nothing underneath. It's quite empty, actually. They don't have anything that satisfies, nothing that satisfies me, but also nothing that satisfies them. I saw such a lack of peace. I saw so much fragmentation. I saw so much emptiness underneath. So there was very much a lot of drama, a lot of show, a lot of performance, but they themselves understand it's just performance. And they're somehow trying to artificially prop up some meaning for existence. Knowing that they're just fooling themselves. Yeah. Right. And so I just saw, wow, if that's the position that you have to defend, I'm sorry for you. Like, actually, the position that Christ has given me to defend, the beauty and truth and embodied reality of the Gospels. I mean, like all that Christ represents and all that he gives us, I get to defend and articulate real, full color, adventurous, good, rich life. And I thought, wow, thank you, Jesus. So I left Harvard confident and more sure than ever of the truth of the Christian story, the message that Christ has given.
That was going to be my next question, is just how it impacted your faith, because people have those, what's going to happen? What will happen to your faith if you go dive into these spaces? It'll deconstruct, right?
Oh, like
you'll never come out alive, right? Or your faith can't. And I hear you saying, like, no, there was a beautiful, like, integrity, and not simplicity in a simple way, but in a very, very deep, simple, complex, simple way of my faith came out like with the wholeness and joy of the Christian faith, not just intact, but like warm and kindled.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a refiner's fire, right? I mean, like, yes, my faith has been refined, but and even at some point at Harvard, I was thinking, this isn't just refiner's fire. I think this is like a corrosive acid. Like, this is really hard. But the God who is able to use those fires to refine us will use corrosive acid at Harvard too. He will use whatever is given there to refine us in. And he did, but I would definitely say I'm grateful to him because I had a base. I had a really solid foundation, right? A house built on the rock will stand through storms, not to switch metaphors, but I had that solid foundation. And I recognize fully that if I had not had that foundation, if I didn't have my strong mentors around me and people praying for me, very easily I could see how a faith could be deconstructed. And at the very least, if not deconstructed, completely distorted and emptied of all transcendent meaning, for sure. Yeah. So it's dangerous. So I actually, for my own children, said there is not a chance that I would bless an undergrad degree at Harvard because I can see that that's where they really get these kids before they have like such a strong intellectual foundation for their faith. Sure. They can get a hold of them pretty quick. And so I was like, graduate school is a little different though.
You're older I like that you went in with your own rock and foundation that needed to be challenged, refined, tested, all that. But you were ready for that. And that's different than 18 years old, 19 years old, showing up blank slate with this towering figure of intellect before you, handing something down. And I mean, we won't get distracted because I want to respect your time, but it is interesting in our moment that I was thinking about your experience at Harvard and just I always think romantically, and I switch metaphors all the time because I didn't go to Harvard. So you do whatever you want to do. But I imagine like walking the campus with your kids, those things that like, hey, this is where mom did that rigorous work. Like that's pretty cool. And you want to be proud of it. And yet in our moment, there's like people who are sitting back just dumbfounded that the president of Harvard can't answer a question. And I'm not trying to blow this out of proportion, but just something as simple. I mean, Dr. Amy Orr-Ewing talked about just the moral outrage of something that's so unjust that feeling is legitimate. You have her saying that, right, from her Oxford education. And then you have the president of Harvard saying, it's contextual, right? And if it's not acted on, like, can I really say that calling for the genocide of people is a moral outrage, that's an evil? And wouldn't answer that question without context. Is it hard for you when you think like, I wanted to walk and like cheer on and say, kids, look at where I walked and what I went through? And is there a part of you that just goes, what happened to us? Like, that's not why I went there.
Yeah, it's deeply shameful that she could not answer that question correctly. It's shameful. It's hurtful. It's embarrassing for me. I actually, looking at my degree, I seriously considered just ripping it up because it's just Harvard is an idol of this world. It had gloriously beautiful roots. I mean, like their motto is Veritas, is truth. It was all about not just some truth, your truth, my truth, the transcendent truth. This was a Christian institution designed to bring glory to God by discovering the depth and coherence of his created order that we're a part of. And so Harvard had such glorious roots in the fact that they would allow this, that they would drink the Kool-Aid they themselves have manufactured and let it just corrode everything that was once good about it. It's shameful.
Yeah.
But I choose to recall that there is it's a complex place. There is good there. There are Christians there. There is at the very least, etched in stone all over Harvard reference to Christ. Yeah. And so someday there could be those who look up to those buildings and those monuments, and assuming they're not destroyed, and remember.
Yeah.
That, hey, there was something once good and redeemable here, and we can redeem it back again. But what the Lord wills to do with Harvard, we'll see. That's his. Yeah. We'll see what God's going to do.
This is the thing, though. This is what I mean when I say the life and beauty of the gospel, because I think that you, even just in who you are, represent a hopeful possibility, right? It's up to God what he will do, but a hopeful possibility in a culture that has experienced like the vacuous, like the hollowed out version of some philosophical things that have been dominant for 100 years, these dominant philosophical ideas just weighing down on people. And yet that restlessness, that hollowness that is there is acute enough now that I think people are starting to back up. And I mean, you hear people, that shocked people saying, wait a second, my fourth grader can answer that question. Mm-hmm. anybody, you put that question up, right? Is the calling for the
Absolutely.
genocide of people a bullying act or whatever? Is that an evil? Anybody would say that's a yes.
Yes, I completely agree. The Lord is using this. The Lord is using this opportunity to expose the absurdity of this worldview. Yeah. So I'm grateful to God for what He's doing in this moment.
And I think that's the hopeful turn that I think is possible. I think that the beautiful thing is not to deconstruct institutions or throw stones at these institutions, but say, no, these are beautiful places. And they're wonderful, rigorous, important realities to having institutions like that. And what if they were filled again with light, and that the truth was a pursuit, and good and true and beautiful were our aim. So again, we've just burned up like all your time talking about that, but I'll bring it to the table to get to the book, because I want to celebrate your book.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things that stood out about your book, first of all, the cover is beautiful, and I always pay attention to the cover art that people choose and things like that. And I was looking down the table from the art of the book, and I just was enchanted by the reality that the substance, not the hollowness of these other philosophical ideas that really do lead you to despair ultimately. And the invitation that Jesus seems to make brings you to a table, brings you to bread, and bread of life, and warmth, and hospitality, and a yes that is surprisingly joyful, to use Lewis. And you find yourself seated at a table that you didn't manufacture and don't really belong at, but you're welcomed. And that was the heart of your book. So I've got sorts of things I want to talk about, but why did you write? And why did you write from that perspective of the table?
Sure. So I wrote the book first and foremost as some small act of worship to God. It was very much an offering to Him. I wanted to give back to Him something of what He had given me. And I wanted it to also be a gift to my family. Like I said, my family is from Arkansas, and I learned so much about Jesus from them. And I wanted to tell some of our shared stories. And hopefully in doing so, I wanted to re-enchant those memories with an awareness of the presence and goodness of Christ in all of them. So that was very much my motive. And it was important to me to write from the table, because the table represents so many good and important things. First, most of my favorite memories as a child were gathered around the table, telling stories and feasting and laughing. And the table is where you come together. The table is gathering at the table is this everyday ritual that we do. And even though it's something we do every single day and it might seem so ordinary, actually it's imbued with so much transcendence, so much meaning and significance, that it's extraordinary to come to the table. I mean, at the table, we're being nourished again. We're being energized to go back out into the world again. At the table, we're being reconciled to one another. We're recognizing like our humanity and our need. And we're also recognizing the divinity and provision of God. I mean, at the table, like Christ Himself, Christ prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. He's not just preparing a table, right? He's preparing a table in the presence of our enemies. So He's saying, yeah, I know the devil's out there. I know that this is torturing you. I know you've got that problem. I know that's on your back. I know, I get it. I see the war that we're in, and that doesn't faze me. Pull up a chair and feast at my table. Yeah. So let's eat. Not when the enemies leave and retreat, but right now, despite them in their presence. That kind of invitation is so powerful to me and so beautiful. So for me, it's like I have to write from the position of sitting at that table. There's no other place to write from. So far as I see it.
I'm preaching and cheering. I'm going to start getting up and moving around and mess up the whole thing. But this is the thing, right? All of that you just covered about Harvard and what we were talking about with the culture that's changing, and you go, it can feel so overwhelming. And I think for all of us who listen and have been in this conversation around this podcast and these ideas, at times you can go, I don't know what to do. And I think your book is an invitation to say, no, if we embody that reality, that God literally sets a table in the present, this is His way.
Yes.
And, hospitality is our protest, Corrie ten Boom. Right?
Yes.
there is something about our embodied life that's a yes in a world of no's, in a positive in a world of negation. All these things that's an affirmation, not a positive, but an affirmation in a world of negation that happens at the table. And so catch that. If you're listening or you're running or whatever, just catch that tonight, if you don't have a table, or if your table's covered with other things, or if it's become a laptop station, there is something right now within our ability, within our reach, whether we even have a home or don't have a home, right? We can create space for a table that begins to reconcile people and begins to put us in a posture that reflects the reality of God's love for his world. That's pretty powerful, given so many things that are radically beyond our control. And yet this one, you said, now there is something that we can do. And you start early with Granny. And I was enamored with Granny. So I would love to know more. You can just talk about Granny. But she taught you something about welcome and the power, not just of having a table, but of bringing people to the table. What did she teach you about welcome?
Yes. Yeah, Granny is a saint. She's extraordinary. There's no one in the whole world like her, so far as I'm concerned. And part of her power is that Granny, her whole life that I've known her, she's never said anything negative about anyone. She doesn't complain about people. She doesn't judge them. She doesn't condemn them. And she's just humble like that. And so what that's meant for welcome is that I've always known that no matter what I've done or haven't done, I would be welcome at her table. And there would always be a place for me there. And Granny's table, her house, is the only place that I know this side of heaven where it would be impossible for me to show up too early, and I could never stay too late. I am not just welcome, but I'm always welcome. There's always that space there. So Granny giving that hospitality to me, it's so meaningful to me, because actually if she would be so embarrassed to hear me bragging about her like this, and she would shake her head no, and she would just be terribly humble and Christian about the whole thing. But she, Granny never intended to be a heroine or our matriarch. She never intended to change the world. All she was doing was being a faithful Christian woman. She was being a wife and a mother, and she was making meals and raising her children, and she was trying best she could to follow the word and obey the Lord, but in her simply living and simply walking this simple small town Southern life, she opened up a door to the kingdom of heaven for me. And she taught me grace and welcome. And she taught me the power of Christ setting that table in the presence of enemies. And she taught me refuge in war. And she has just single-handedly transformed my vision of God. And she did it just by being her. And barely speaking, right? I mean, she speaks, but she won't speak a bad word, right? So it's really, she's amazing.
Yeah. What an amazing tribute. And I know exactly what you're saying, that she would be like, no, no, no. And part of that no, 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 right, is good. And we love that. Part of it, I think, is that we have undervalued these things, right? Yes. And so Granny's response, well, I didn't go to Harvard. I didn't go to Oxford. I can't write eloquently or wax eloquently about the theological backdrop that makes up the meaningfulness of a table. She would say, that's not me. Yeah. But I've made you this. And in the Western world, we've preferred and valued this version, which is good, over this version. And I just want to say, for all of you parents, grandparents, friends who set tables on a regular basis, don't think too small about what you're actually doing. Because look at the conversation we're having. We're having this conversation not because Granny wrote a book about it in abstraction, but because Granny embodied it in a way that shaped and formed you and allowed you to experience something that was real in good times and in wartime and in all these different moments. Don't miss the power of what you're describing there. Like, how do we really learn? What really gets handed down from generation to generation? How does that really transact? Part of it is this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you say, I loved what you said. You said that it doesn't matter how rebellious you were or what your shortcomings were. you are always welcome. And again, that theological conviction, it's only true if it's true. We say these grand things about the Christian faith, but have I seen them? That no matter how rebellious I was or what my shortfalls were, and you didn't just say that, you said that you could never arrive soon enough. She always wished you came sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, yes, 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 yes. Yeah, you and Juan do that. I've been to your home for dinner, and it feels like that. Juan's easy to love. Just
Yes, he is.
he just opens the door, and you feel like he always wishes you would have arrived sooner.
Yes.
Take that away. Like, I've learned that from you guys, that you embody that. I wish you would have arrived sooner. To feel that from somebody's home is wonderful. You mentioned too, just there's these little nuggets. You'll have to get the book, so you can get it on Amazon, right?
Yes, sir.
Supper Reflections from Our Table, Kara Kennedy. Order the book and just walk through the essays, because you're going to do what I've done. There's just these wonderful things. And one of them, you said, bread can teach us. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
Oh, I could talk for hours about what bread can teach.
Yeah.
So, what will I say? I will say bread can teach us, starting with the gospel itself. If you study the science of baking bread, of how it comes to exist, the entire gospel story is written into it. It's magnificent. You really see the glory of God in this. I actually learned this from a rabbi who's not a Christian, ironically. And I was like, don't you see, you're talking about Jesus? But in the making of bread, you start with wheat. Wheat is fully alive. It has to be crushed. It has to be dried. It has to be completely stripped of life. And once it's killed and it's crushed, it lies in wait. And then eventually, when you're ready to make bread, you mix in water. The yeast that's naturally on the wheat is activated. And then all of a sudden, some new life starts to form. Literal air starts to breathe within this dough. And it's no longer just flour and water anymore. It's been completely transformed. Now it's something wholly other. You put it in this oven, you wait, it rises up and it comes out, and it's something new. Not just something new and transformed, but it's something that nourishes. It's something that smells good. It looks good. It brings life. It draws people in. When I'm making bread, people are drawn into my home, right? Something extraordinary is happening there. And this is the story of Christ. This is the work of Christ in what he did when he came to earth, but it's also the work of Christ and what he does within us. And then Christ says, I am the bread of life. And so he himself identifies with this bread. So it's just telling us that this miraculous resurrection life of Christ is not only written into bread, but embodied by bread. And he invites us not just to receive him and to share in him, but to actually consume him and metabolize that bread, to let him and his work and his resurrection life and miracle become a part of us. And then that energizes the works that we go out from our table to do. So there's just so much in bread. And I mean, obviously Christ, I'll say this and then I'm just going to have to stop because I could keep going always on bread. Christ chose to be identified in the breaking of bread. Yeah. When there were these guys walking after his death and they were walking along this road to Emmaus and they were talking about Christ, and Christ appears to them and they start talking to Christ. They're literally physically with him. They're looking at him. They're talking to him about theology. Like he starts explaining, actually Christ even starts explaining the significance of him and everything that had just happened. And they're just walking along. They don't recognize him. It's not until they get into the home where they would stay, they invite him in. So now you have this context of hospitality, and they break bread. And when Christ breaks bread with them, then they recognize him. Yeah. This is a God who chooses to be recognized and remembered in the breaking of bread. So yeah, there's a lot in bread.
Yeah, no, it's good. I want to, again, cheer, house of bread.
Yes, Bethlehem. Yep.
House of bread. Manger, like the place where something comes to feed, like the origin story itself. It's no matter where you look, it's this beautiful appearing of this bread of life. And I love that even there was a debate in the Catholic Church about, the real presence. And the most beautiful I've ever heard this described, during the Enlightenment and rise of science, people said we've disproved it, right? Because the Eucharist isn't literally body and blood. We've looked at it under a microscope, so you're wrong. You've lied to us. And I love this way of thinking that we looked in the wrong place because you are what you eat. And so you metabolize. And when that shift was given, I don't know, I mean, I've read it from a few different places, so I can't cite it precisely, but it shifted everything to me. I was like, you are what you eat, indeed. Like we who are many take from one loaf, and you are what you eat. We are the body of Christ because we just looked in the wrong place, put the microscope in a different way. Isn't that beautiful?
I love that. Yes, it is. What? Yes, it is.
Bread, and it means clay. I didn't know this, but in your book, bread means clay, Hebrew.
Yes. So there's a Hebrew word, isa, means clay, and it's the word used when the Bible talks about God forming us as clay. It's the same word used there as the word for dough. And so when we're baking bread, when we're invited to bake bread, which the Bible invites us to do, and this is actually very central and important in the Bible, we are participating in the creative works of God. Just as God, our creator, formed and shaped us as clay, he invites us to rest in his shadow and form and create something else, as dough. And yes, it's really extraordinary. There's another Hebrew word for bread dough that actually is used today in Hebrew for cradle.
Okay.
And so this is also kind of interesting. So that you've got this connection between human life and nourishment and care and provision and clay. I mean, it's God has woven all these things together in a way that it still holds mysteries I'm still discovering.
Yeah. I love that idea of looking at a tapestry from underneath it. And it's difficult to make sense of because lines are going in all these different directions. And so there seems to be coherence to it, but it's also really mysterious and difficult. But if you look at the fabric above it, right, it all makes sense. Yes. And I love that you see in part, right? We see in part, and how wonderful it would be even someday to look through the whole story and go, no way, right? Yeah. It's so good. Mm-hmm. I think maybe it's the demonic American culture that's anti-carb, right? Like this is actually the devil.
I'm so against that. It's like no carb people. It's like, I don't even know if we can be friends.
I don't know. Like maybe it's the mark of the beast. Like if you don't eat, like that's a thing. I don't know. We'll bring bread back. You've convinced me. I was a non-bread. I'm going to come back and just feast on bread.
It's got to be homemade. It's got to be made with love.
There you go. I don't even have time to go all the places that I want to go. So you're going to have to get the book. But I do want to ask you this because I thought it was important. And you mentioned it just a few minutes ago about signposts because I thought it was really wonderful what you did and the catch you made about nostalgia versus the signpost, because it's easy to reminisce about Arkansas and Granny and a table and quickly just be dopamine-filled saturation with goodness because of memories and want to go back. And you are really good to like touch that and say, that's not bad. That is, right? And we feel all of that, but there's an and to it. And you move to that signpost. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just what you learned there about nostalgia not being the aim. The aim is not to look back and to have these things pull us to something else, but that really it's an invitation to take something with us into the future.
Yes, absolutely. I realized as I reflected more and more on these amazing memories that we have gathered around our table. And when my family gathers, it's no small thing. We gather with lots of food, lots of stories, loud, uproarious laughter. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big celebration for our families to gather. And these stories are told, and it always just seems like there was these good old days that we were all a part of, and we just reminisce in them. And I recognized as I was even writing this book that my family had this great risk of longing for these days past and relishing so much in that nostalgia that we would miss or replace that which we're supposed to be looking at, which is looking forward. Actually, the Bible says, forget what's behind, look forward to what's ahead. Okay, well, what does that mean? So these wonderful stories and these wonderful experiences that we have, they're not supposed to try to pull us into the past, because that's unsatisfying. We know we actually can't get there. So I know that's not what God could want from us. Okay, then what does he want from us? He wants us to recognize that all those good stories point us forward to this moment in time yet to happen, this redemptive place yet to be experienced by any of us this side of heaven. All of these things are just signposts pointing us towards heaven. So when I look back, I have to resist the temptation to just wallow in nostalgia and want to go back to the good old days. When I look back, I need to be, wow, God, you are so sweet to us. You allowed us to have these experiences and keep these stories that talk about taking risks, going on adventures, overcoming hardships and obstacles, having these hilarious mishaps. My dad actually is the grand storyteller in our family, and he's got the very best stories. I could listen to him for hours and hours. And all of those stories that my dad is so famous for telling, all of them have a moral to them. And every single moral is Jesus. Every single one really points to Jesus. This longing for justice, this longing for adventure, this longing for creation, for discovering new things, this longing even for joy and laughter. All of those things really find their fulfillment in Christ. And so I've come to see the stories as signposts to heaven. And it allows me to forget what is past and look forward to what is ahead.
Yeah. It's, literally the sacrament of communion is sacramental. You see through it to something. And I think that's what I hear you saying. And the table it functions sacramentally in this way that it gives us a glimpse to look forward and see something greater through it. It's a taste of it, right?
Very well said.
Yeah.
I like that. That's the way to say it.
Yeah. Well, here's what I love about the way you've written it, because it's accessible and there's whimsy and story and enchantment and all the things that just make it really beautiful. I think I told you that when I first got the book. It was fun to read. Like, you welcome us into your home and your family. So I love it. We're turning into a new year, and we're thinking about things that we want to kind of reprioritize. And even just this conversation probably shifted posture in some ways for some people to say, you know what, I do have a table, and there is something about supper. There is something about that welcome that I want to recover. Quick, just lightning round. Like, for the person who goes, you know what, I'm going to get the book and I want to read and I want to hear Kara's story, but I also then am hearing something about an invitation for me and for my family. What would you say about setting a meaningful table? Because you and Juan do this really beautifully. And what would you just say? There's a lot of context. Some of us live in apartments or student housing or, a house on the hill. It doesn't really matter. But what makes a meaningful table? And if somebody's saying, I want to find our way back to that place, what would you say to them as they start a new year?
Thank you. I actually learned that from my mom, who makes the most meaningful table. That she learned it from her mom, Granny. But what my mom taught me is that you have to pour love into your table. And she always is out to serve the very best that she can, not out of any source of pride or ego, nothing like this, but really just out of a genuine love and care for the other person. So as we go about setting our tables in the new year, doesn't have to be extravagant, it doesn't have to be any of those things, but it should be thoughtfully prepared things made with love and care and thought in the other person or the people that we're sharing it with. And it should be made in gratitude to God, whatever it is, whatever we have to offer. Let's not be ashamed of it, think it's not good enough, it's not going to taste good, whatever, I can't cook. That doesn't matter. Like, just gather with gratitude to God and expectation that He is going to be present, because when two or more are gathered in His name, there He is with us. If Christ is at that table with us, and if Christ is as good as He says He is, and He is, something extraordinary can happen there at that table. So let's just pull up a chair And let's recognize ultimately that as much as we believe we're the host at our tables and in our homes or apartments or wherever we might be, the reality is like we are guests to the ultimate host. So let us just rest with Christ at the head of the table and enjoy.
Yeah.
And enjoy simple things, even if it's just bread and wine.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect. It's a great place.
And a good cheese.
Yes, and a good cheese. Yeah. There's that. I'm with you. I love that. And I think what a great invitation. I think it's great to start the year with a conversation about supper and the table because, again, multiple times a day, we need to eat. And I know some fitness person's going to debate me, but at least occasionally you're going to find yourself needing to eat. And so we're set up for it. Right? This is one of those things it's in front of us that we're going to come back rhythmically, liturgically as a family. And so you've given us a wonderful invitation to be thoughtful about it, to fill those moments with love and to see them as sacramental and to open a door to see something greater and to experience joy and to be woven back together to God and to his love for us. So thank you. The book is Supper Reflections from Our Table, Kara Kennedy. We'll have to have you back. There's like way more things. I wanted to talk about Cuba. I wanted to talk about all sorts of things. So we'll have to have you back. But thank you so much. And this is a treasure. So get the book, order it. And I hope that all of us find more time at the table at your invitation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.